Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, I wanted to take a step back from a lot of the things we've done around scripting and look at some of the more fundamental concepts that really drive a lot of those scripts that we do. And that is taking a deeper look at XML generally, and then looking at applying that to understanding the Vmix XML, which is a core part of a lot of the scripting we do. But before we get into that, I'd like to invite everybody, if you have any questions, any comments you'd like to share, just post them and we'll try to get to everything here live on the show. If you'd like to join us live, we have a call-in capability that we are posting here on the screen. And if you would like, we'll have somebody from the studio get you on to talk with us directly. All right. Before I get into the core of what we want to do, I just want to, there's quite a few comments we have sitting over here. So I want to make sure we get to check in with everybody. So we have automation for Vmix. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us live. Vangelis, thank you. Happy that you're a part of the community here. So thanks. We have Parker. Parker, hi. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you here. So Ravikant, thank you, Ravikant. Great to have you here. We have MGL Video Services from Vienna. Thank you. I appreciate you. That's Martin. So I appreciate that, Martin. So JP, good to see you here, JP. Thank you. Marco, great to have you here again. So yeah, it's funny. I gather you're talking about the the Vmix 27. But yeah, this is that could be something that's could be a lot of fun to work with, or it could be last week's show. So I'm not sure, but either one, we're looking forward to working with a lot of stuff over the coming weekend as well. So thanks for joining us. Vlad, hi, great to have you here, Vlad. Samuel, so I am glad you're excited for the show. Hopefully this is something that, will help level set some of the stuff we've been talking about in the past. So thanks, Samuel. Multimedia Max from Belgium. Hello, thank you for joining us. And Tom Eagle, Tom from Kansas City. Always great to see you here, Tom. Thanks. Dan, thank you. Glad you were able to catch us live this time. Always fun to have people live in the show. And you the man. Hello back, you. Great to have you here. Okay, so thank you all for sort of signing in and saying hi. I appreciate that. So I think probably the best place to get started would be to start looking at XML, because the core of Vmix scripting really revolves around understanding what's going on in their own sort of structure and state XML, which is available through the API. So I want to go in and start to look at XML in general, and then start to dive into the Vmix component of it. So if we take a look, what I'd like to do is to show you how to create XML that would correspond to your typical phone directory. And this hopefully will give us a practical example to start to dive into XML around. So if we came back, we'd want to say we have a directory. And in that directory, we're going to have entries. And so each one of these entries will have a first name, middle name, last name, organization, phone, and email. So this is a very abbreviated type of directory, but this will give you a construct of how XML would work. Now, the thing with entries is that you don't just have one of them. So we would end up having different n number of entries for however many people we would have. So what I want to show you is what the XML would look like if I'm storing this directory, this sort of phone contact directory, in XML. So the first thing you'll notice is that we want to start and say, we're creating a directory. And so in XML, there's a concept called elements. And what an element is, it's sort of a name, then a set of values associated with that name, and then closing that name. So basically, it's like putting parentheses around something, but with names. So you're saying, I'm creating a directory, and everything between this start directory, which is the triangle, sort of the angle brackets, and the angle brackets slash directory, that's going to be part of my directory. And then the next thing we're going to say is, well, we want to put at least one entry in this directory. So in XML, we sort of have the same next level in. So now I'm sitting here going, I have a directory, and I'm going to create an entry for that directory. And you can see from over here, we're going to have to add all these different elements. So the way these would look is I would go and say, well, the first element I want is going to be the first name. So we create something which is an open bracket first name. We type in the value that actually goes in that, and then we close it. And we do this in a similar way for middle name, for last name. So each one of these things, we're opening a bracket and we're putting a value and then closing that XML element. So if this case here, this would be us just filling this out. So this is at our very start now. You get to see that we've created a directory. This directory contains another element that's an entry. And so everything in this entry comes between this open entry and this close entry. And then we have all of the values that we have here. And each one of them is bracketed off. And so when you construct XML, you're really looking at a model like this. Every element sort of has a hierarchy. This is a part of this. And then eventually you get to the point where what you're showing is the data itself. So you'd say directory, the first entry, first name is Robert. And that's so you think through that as sort of a path into the information. And then if I have a second one, I would just do the same thing. I'd say, okay, now I have a second entry under my directory, and it has different information. But you notice the structures are still the same. So all the elements that we have, the first, middle, last name, all those are the same between what we have in the first entry and what we have in the second. And I could add any number of these, and this would be sort of a valid XML structure that we're dealing with. So that's the first thing. When you start to look at XML, that's how you need to think about it. And keep this hierarchy in mind, because that is exactly the structure that you'll see in the Vmix XML when we get to that. So at the very top, from a nomenclature point of view, the top of your XML tree is usually called your root element. It's the name of the thing you're creating. So like in Vmix, it would be Vmix, because it's everything that's inside of Vmix. So that's the root element. Under the root element will be child elements. So entry is a child of root. You also have all of these elements here. So those are all children of entry. So if you look here, first name is a child of entry, and entry is a child of directory. So that's sort of your root, and then all the children that go down beyond that. So that's a good way when you start to think of this hierarchy of using that sort of vocabulary to describe things from the root and then children elements that are under that. So these names are called elements, by the way. So I've used the term sort of undefined, but so this is an XML element. When people look for it, I'm looking for a specific element in XML. That's what they're talking about. It's directory or entry or first name. And the element gets its description through this hierarchy. It's directory, entry, first name. So that's sort of how you understand when you talk about things in XML. Now, there's a few more things that are important. So what I mentioned is we have elements. And so an element can have a value between them. And that value, to be clear, it can either be a string. So in XML land, everything is text. So there aren't like different data types inside of the XML itself. Everything is a string. So you can either have that be a pure string, or it can be other elements. So just like directory has entry has first name, those are all an element containing other elements. But first name contains a value that contained, Michael or Betty or whatever name was in there. So that's the value piece. When you look at this, an element, everything inside that whole value piece, and then the close of an element, for nomenclature, that's called an XML node. And a node is basically, if I grabbed it at the start point and picked it up from the end point, and took it out and put it somewhere, that is a complete node. It describes a single element or multiple elements nested fully. So you have a beginning and a close, and all the values or elements in between that starting element and closing element. So that is the next concept. I would do some sort of search to pull out a certain type. I want to pick out all of my contacts that are in New York. And so that's the typical thing. You'd use node lists to say, I want to search in my big XML and create a small list, which is just the things that match certain criteria. And so that's how we use XML node list. And so those are the two concepts: an XML node, which is an element with a value inside, an element bracketed with a value inside, and a node list, which is a collection of XML nodes. And the thing with node list is you index them like an array. I can say, I want the first element in this list. I want the third element in this list. So it lets you can create loops and sort of step through a list one by one to go through all of the values. And they have other things, like they have a count. So how many elements are in this list? And that's how you'd know to say, okay, give me all of my directory entries that of people who live in New York. Then you can say, well, how many people are in? I need a count because I need to loop through them and know how to go through it. So that's how you do that. Node lists in Visual Basic.net have different properties, and that's one of them: the ability to know what's in it, how many elements are in it, things of that sort. So that's the next set of concepts in looking at XML that I think are really important to understand. The third thing, and this is an interesting one because it isn't really necessary, but it's very convenient, and it's used completely throughout everything that's in the Vmix XML. And that's a concept of an attribute. Now, if you look at the entries we did, the entries basically said, I have an entry and it's a first name value, close first name, email value, close email. So that was how we set it up. And these are all just elements that we have here. There is another thing you can add to that called an attribute. And what that will look like is something like this, where I can come back and say, yes, this is an entry, but I'm adding an attribute to that entry to tell you this is a personal contact. It's not a business contact. And so, I can go and say, but this other entry here, this is a business contact for me. So, just gives you that distinction between the two. This could actually be added as another element. So this is it's a choice. It's sometimes a choice because it makes it clearer that, certain things may be things you'd want to search on versus values you want to extract. So there could be reasons to do it, but that's basically the distinction between them. You can set it up as an attribute, or you can set it up as an element. Both work. Vmix heavily uses attributes in setting up the XML. Okay, so probably now, let me just go back and see if we have, oh, excuse me, sorry about that. See if we have anything coming in from your comments here. So it's hard to read the lower third's text, low contrast. Okay, I'll see if anybody in the technical side can figure out what's going on. So let's see. Automation is saying the stream has stopped and now it's back. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on. So I apologize if we are having some technical issues there. But please, if you can't see us, I apologize. Hopefully, this is something that was just a blip. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is jump over and talk a bit more about the Vmix XML. And this is basically what you have in our Vmix XML. I'll go through how to get there in a minute, but I just wanted to give sort of this high-level view of what's in it. So if you remember, when we talked previously, we said that we had a root node and then children nodes. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. Inside of this XML structure, you have Vmix as our root node. So everything else comes under Vmix. And you can see I have the open and the close element for my Vmix level. And then under that, I have a set of child elements that either contain data, something like version, where it's telling me this is version 26.0045, or the edition is the 4K edition. So that's, one type that we have. The other, though, is we have elements, these child elements that contain other elements. So that's inputs. So I can open this up, and these are the inputs that we're going to go through. But you can see now that these inputs contain other elements that then contain data. So that's the next concept that we just sort of touched on. So when you're looking through the Vmix XML as a hierarchy, you'll have both of these. You'll have data's elements that are right available at the, right below the root layer, the direct children of the root, and others which will be nested deeper under the root directory. So we have, this is where all the data about our inputs are stored. We have the overlays. So you can see anytime you assign an overlay inside of Vmix, it will show up here, what's in that overlay. You will see, all these things which are, now these are data sets again, the preview, the active, the fade to black, these are all state types of things. What is in which one of those? We have all the transitions that are assigned, and those have their own elements under that. And then again, a lot of flags. Are we recording? Are we going external? Are we streaming? All of these things are here. Other mixes that we could have, everything about audio that you'd want to have in here, and all our dynamic values, which is something we've just looked through very recently. And then we close it here on the other end with the Vmix bracket. So let me go and jump over to my Vmix screen for a minute, and I'll show you exactly what this XML is referring to when we go through this. So I set this up as a very simple Vmix session. And you can see here that I have basically the names, the type of thing that is in each one of these inputs. I have an NDI input. I have a title input. I have a list, because I want to show how that looks like in XML. I have a pure audio input. This is just an audio that would play in a loop. I have an image. I actually put a mix as another input here, so you can see how that mix input will look in the XML. And then I just have a video input. So this is a good sampling of the different types of things that you can see inside of an XML, a Vmix XML. And we'll go through that as we go through all of the inputs. So with that in mind, let's switch back to the XML, and I'll start to dig in a little more detail. And we talked about all of the things up front where it's version, edition, preset. Those are just values that we're pulling. And so just to go through it, when I look, The version and the edition can tell me what capabilities are in this vmix. So you could actually create scripting that was sympathetic to what your vmix version is capable of. So you could write a script that said, if it's 4K, I can manipulate 4 different outputs. If it's HD, I can only manipulate, sort of what's in program, and that's all I have. So different things that you can then scope some of the functionality you build based on the version of vmix that it's running under. We will go into the inputs in detail, so I don't want to jump into that too quickly because there's a lot more we'll dive. So I'm going to skip that for right now and go into overlays. And the interesting thing you'll probably say is that, well, vmix has 4 overlays, which is true. And so if I came back here, let me actually just sort of move this here so I can make this a little bigger, but let you see everything that's going on up here as well. So what I have here is my overlays 1 to 8. And what that does is the first 4 are for your traditional overlay. So if and I'm just going to do this so we don't have to take a look. If I just go and I put my title input into into overlay 2. If I refresh the vmix xml, let me get this off here. What you'll see now is my title input, number 2, is now listed as the overlay number 2 here. So this information, when I make a change over in vmix, that change is now being reflected over here. So the first 4 are for the 4 overlays that you think of on top of, that sort of layer on top of your program output, or any one of the outputs you can direct it to. The next 4, 5 to 8, they are for basically your stingers. You have 4 stingers in the latest versions of vmix, and this says what is assigned to each of those stingers, what's playing on them. So that's why you have 8. You don't have sort of 4 obvious and 4 hidden standard overlays. This is something that is for your traditional overlays and for your 4 stingers. And that's what's the information that's going to show up here. We have preview and active. So preview is which input is in my preview. So we have input 1 in preview, and which input is in my program. They call it active here, but you'd probably typically refer to it as my program out. And so I have my 3rd input is in program out. So fade to black is, again, it's a value, a direct value, and it's saying, am I in fade to black mode or not? So this could be really useful because one of the things you can always do is say, I can turn around and have scripts run that would say, I want to make sure when I start my show that I am not in fade to black. So you could do a test to say, if I'm in fade to black, make sure I unfade, turn fade to black off and go back into my program. So different things you can do to handle that. And that gives you that sort of signaling back and forth. The next one down, which is the transitions, those are basically the standard transitions that you have if you look at your vmix interface. Let me switch back to the vmix interface for a second here. You'll see that that's what you see here. You have, cut, fade, merge, wipe. So these are these inputs, and that's what you have set up for basically the first 4 that are in here. You have 4 that are selectable, and those 4 are what you see represented in your XML. So those are your transitions. Now, again, we have a whole set of flags again, and you'll know these things just from, am I recording? Is that true or false? And do I have external? And that gives you that external webcam capability. So is that turned on or not? Am I streaming? Is a playlist playing? Am I in full screen mode? Is full screen turned on or off? Full screen is the ability to set up like a multi-view or several multi-views, and that you can turn those on or off. That's what full screen does. And this tells you, is that on or off? So these are all just state-based things. So having all of that available, let me sort of focus here. We also have, if we add a mix to as an input in vmix, it'll show you to say, what is actually in the preview and the program of that mix. So, and this is telling me for mix number 2, I have preview 1. Preview is set to input 1, and my program out, my active, is set to input 5. So that's it. So if I have multiple, you can have, I think, 16 mixes now. So each one of these will be numbered, and it will let you know what's in them. So you can manipulate them now, because now that you know what's in there, you can send shortcuts to change what's in those inputs. So the next is audio. And audio has basically the state of all of the buses. So your master and bus A to however many you have based on the version of Vmix you're using. And it gives you pretty much 4 main elements in here. Plus, if you're talking the master, you always also know the headphone volume, because you can direct sort of the master to your headphones. So it gives you the volume. So that's where the slider level would be in your audio sliders. It's at top to bottom, so 100 to 0. It tells you whether it's muted or not. So muted is useful because sometimes you may turn things off if you have somebody that's waiting to go live. You may mute the microphones, and then once you go through your intro and everybody goes live, you unmute the mics. So this lets you know, make sure the mute state is on or off for everybody based on what you want. Then it has 2 things called meter F1 and meter F2. And basically, that's the audio level that's playing through the left and the right meters. So when you see those little meters that slide up and down with each input, that's giving you the level information for that. And it's dynamic. So it's not that something is set that way. This is moving with the audio. And that is something that you could use to do things based on audio level. If somebody is, you could turn around and say, if somebody isn't speaking, I can lower their mic, but as soon as they start speaking, the meter levels start to move, I could raise that up. So you can sort of keep things quiet in a conversation, but have it very quickly respond in scripting to say, I'm making adjustments to audio levels based on what's going on here. So you can basically control the volume based on activity with the meters, things like that. So interesting things that are available there. And then, of course, your headphone volume is the same as the audio level out. It's just what's the level that I'm going to hear in my headphones. So I think the last element in here before we get to inputs, which I'll do a deeper dive in, is around your dynamic values. And we've gone through this before, but these are what are associated with my dynamic inputs. So what input is in each one of these, and what are associated with my dynamic values. And so these would be sort of hard interior values. So you'd have like either an input number or some other string that you'd have. And when I talk input number again, it's a number as a string, because everything in this is going to be string based. Okay, so I just sort of want to pause there. If you have any questions on this piece, let's get them in here, because I'm going to go through the inputs, but I want to make sure that anything else that I'm talking about here is covered and clear. So I don't want you to be looking at it and saying, well, could you explain something else? Because let's make sure we get that as we go through this. So next, let me jump over and talk about the inputs here, because inputs are probably the most used piece in scripting, the inputs XML. So if you're looking at this, you go and say, I have Vmix, then inputs, which is the child of Vmix, and then under inputs, like if you think we had the directory and then a bunch of entries, we have inputs and then a bunch of individual inputs. So singular, inputs plural, inputs singular. And each one of those contains a whole set of values. So one of the things you'll notice as I do this is your browser understands XML as a concept. And so you can sort of expand and contract things to look deeper into your XML tree. So the same way I did up here where I opened and closed the XML inputs, that's just inside my browser. And this address up here, if you go onto the Vmix machine, the machine that you would be running Vmix, open a browser and go to localhost 8088/API, you will be able to jump in to this Vmix XML and see exactly how your Vmix preset is organized in XML. So that's what we're looking at here. We're basically on the same system with Vmix, and I'm looking at this XML in a dynamic way. So if I go here, let's look at our first input. And you can see this input goes from here to here. So all of this information, that's our open bracket, and that's our close bracket. But what you'll notice, and this is why I said you could have elements, everything represented by elements, but inside of Vmix, they have almost everything represented by attributes. So that's why I thought it was really important to put attributes in here. So if you look at this input, every input has a couple of things in common. And that's really the first element you see here. So under input, there's an attribute called a key. And that key is basically a GUID. Internally, Vmix is going out and generating some unique, general ID, global user ID for each input. And that's the number that you see in here. So it isn't meant to be person friendly, but from a machine point of view, it's unique. And there are a lot of them. So it's a safe number to use as a unique identifier for something. So in each input, they give it a key, which is a unique identifier. They also tell you what input number is this. So they just do it sequentially, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I move inputs around, so if I swapped the order that I had certain inputs in, the key will remain the same. Unless I delete the input and then create a new input, once I create an input, that key will always remain the same no matter where it's moved or where else it appears. If it can appear in layers inside another input, this key will go with it. The input number is variable. If I add another input before it, this number is going to change. The next thing that has as an attribute is a type. So this is what type of input is this? Is it a video source? Is it an NDI feed? Is it a list? Is it, anything? So that's telling you what this is. And then it has two other attributes, a title. So what did I choose to name this input? And it has what is called a short title. Typically, these are the same unless you have something that is like a list where there is another part to it. So you can sit there and go, when I have a list and then, the thing that I'm playing in the list, you see in the title, the thing I'm playing in the list will show up in the title. That's what you'll see on screen. But the short title will just be the name that you assign to it. So not critical that you understand this, but that's something to know. That's why they have the two of these, because there can be cases where you would have an input with a different title and short title. So the next thing is it's saying, what's the state? Is it running? Is it paused? Those types of things. And that's all that's giving you. So it knows that, yes, there's an assigned NDI feed here. And then it's going through, if this is running, it looks at things like position, duration, looping. Those are attributes that are assigned. They are more typically associated with a video, where if I'm playing a video, that position will tell me where in the video I am. But in this case, it's just, you're at the start, and the duration will say how long is the total video. And here it's 0 because it's just going to keep playing. It's a video source. It is not looping, again, because it's coming in as a video source. So it doesn't mean anything to loop an incoming video. It's saying, is it muted? And because I have no audio assigned to it, this is muted. So it says no audio assignment means I have a muted input. But it's going through and saying, because potentially it could have audio. It's got a volume level, balance. Is it solo? Those are things that are audio specific. So, what's the level? What's the pan between left and right? Solo means, am I listening to this? You can solo inputs inside the mixer. So am I listening to this uniquely so I can hear something in that particular input? All that information is there. It's also telling me, and this is one that you will probably use in scripting a fair amount. It's telling me what audio buses is it being routed to. So in this case, I set something up randomly where it says it's master A, B, F, and G. And so those are the audio routes that input is being sent out. Now we talked about meter, where you have the left and right meters. This would be if I have active audio taking place, you'll see these numbers change dynamically. Every time I refresh the browser, you'll see that change. And then the gain in decibels, if you go to an input in the audio settings, you can actually go up and set a gain for that input. So if something is coming in really low or you need to boost it and you can't do it directly with the volume, you can add gain to that or add audio level. It increases noise when you do that, but it gives you the ability to add that gain. And then what you see here is basically the title. Again, NDI input, and I close the input element for the first input. So that is sort of at the start. That's how we're going to go through this. And the next ones can be faster, but I just wanted to do this input in detail so it would be clearer. So let me just go through and make sure that if there were questions about what we're doing. So let's see. I think I do now know how to realize an automatic live lamp outside my studio. So yes, this is exactly the sort of thing. And it's important to understand, because I haven't really discussed this much, but because this is coming in through a browser, I can look at this from any machine on my network that can see the Vmix machine. So I can put in my machine's IP address, :8088/API, and I will see the Vmix state on a machine across my studio. So that means I could run code on something else that could drive other things in my studio based on what's going on in Vmix. So understand, it doesn't just have to apply to what you're doing directly in scripting of Vmix. It can be read somewhere else in your studio to catch state of things that are going on, and then change that at another location. So some cool things that you can do with this when you think about, how to set this up. So let's see. We have Tom. So Tom says, how does Vmix use XML? Reports the status or XML is controlling Vmix processing. So XML is a report on status. And thank you, Tom. That's a really good point to touch on. When I'm looking at the XML, it is a snapshot. So every time I refresh my browser, it's a snapshot of the state and structure of Vmix. At that point, I hit refresh on the browser. If I change something in the XML, it doesn't reflect in Vmix. It just sort of corrupts the Vmix data store. That's what Vmix is writing out. So the shortcuts are the way that you actually change anything in Vmix. So that's the reason why in previous versions, like before the 27 beta, you couldn't do things like control pan or positioning of layers, things like that. Even if you could see certain things, you couldn't really control it because you didn't have shortcuts for that. Now they've added that, but you have the shortcuts change things, and the XML lets you see the result of those changes. So that's a good way to think about it. Shortcuts push changes. XML, reading the XML gives you the state as a result of those changes. So let's see. I just killed all the magic behind Vmix. Well, I am sorry about that. Sometimes it helps to when you know the trick, then you become the magician. So that's kind of the goal here. So, okay. So what I want to do now is I want to sort of run through some of the other inputs very quickly to touch on some of the elements of inside the structural elements inside of them. So the next input we have, so we just looked at our first input. So if we go down and say, let's look at input number 2, which is this input here. So our input 2, we had as a title. And you can see all the same things that we talked about are here. It has the key, it has the input number. The type now is saying it is a GT title. And again, we have the title and the short title, which we talked about before. The state is running. It just means it's sort of live. You can, if I go there though, and I turn it off, and we go back to it here, you can see now because I just turned the overlay off, it's saying it's paused, which means it's there, but it's not on top of anything right now. So this title isn't being used, so it's just waiting there. So you can see that's sort of the dynamic elements. I made a change in Vmix, and that change now is reflected in the XML. So this is basically it. It's just tells me, is this on or off? I would have to set overlays like overlay input 1 on, overlay input 1 off, that type of thing, and that will reflect the change here. But this is just the state as it is now. And here's though a set of elements that are interesting. So here I have the input. I have this value text title, and then what I have are these are the values inside of. If you look right here, these are the values that are inside of my title. So if I switch back over to Vmix here, and I'm just going to pull this up, what you're seeing is I have name and company, and that's sort of my headline text and my description text. That was what was in here. So if I go back over to my XML, you can see the headline text is set to name and the description text is set to company, which is what I had in the title. So this is telling you what's in the fields. Now you have all these shortcuts to change, dynamically change the values that are showing in there. But this is giving you, this is the structure inside of that title. And you get to see all of that. And then that's the end of the input. So your entire input for a title is this. So that's hopefully clearer. So let me go to the next one here. And this is a list. So a list is going to have some similar things to title because it's something that contains sub-elements inside it. So like we had before, this is our list input. And in this list, we basically have 3 videos that I just loaded into the list. And again, all the same things in the beginning. This type is a video list, so it's telling you what it is. We have all the titles. We have all the audio things. The state is paused, and that's what you see right here. So, and that's the same thing. If I started to play this, the state would be that it's live. It's playing. If the list isn't playing, then it's just going to show that it's paused. And again, it's showing I'm on the first video. It's at the very beginning of that video. That's the position attribute. The duration attribute is saying this is how many milliseconds. So this is just over 9 seconds of video in the duration. It's not set to loop. It is muted. And the volume, so this is all the stuff that we talked about. But then what the list has is down here inside of this, there's something called list as another element under the input. So this is an element under the input element, which is list. And these are all the items that I have, which are basically, these are the files that I have queued up in my list. And so it's showing you each of them. Where is that file located on my disk? So it's able to pull that. And so that's, again, just very straightforward stuff. But this is all that information being packed into here. So I don't want to sort of belabor everything, but there were a few things that I just wanted to touch on with some of the other inputs. So in the audio input. So what I'm going to do here, I had this audio input, which was my next input that I wanted to get to, which is here, which is titled audio input. They say type video, but anything that could contain video, anything sort of dynamically playable. This is just audio, but it says it's type video. So I'm just going to play this in a loop, because if I come over here, what I want to do is I'm going to refresh this. And now we're going to, so you will see, because I'm playing this audio, I now have values in my meter left, my meter F1 and meter F2. So that's what I meant when I said when you have something that has audio dynamically playing, you see the level of the meters in here. And now there's an equation for understanding, interpreting what these numbers actually mean in terms of what you'd see in a meter. But this is just giving you that core number. But again, that's the only real difference that I wanted to point out inside of this as an input, is that those things now can be, they're active. And at the time I refreshed it, there's where those 2 meter settings were. But everything else is identical to what we've looked at already. And again, it's pretty much the same now for all of these, whether it's an image type or a video. Those things all tend to be the same. Is the video running? Is it paused? Those types of things are all part of this. Is it looped? Is it not looped? But we've talked about all that. So it works the same with all of these. So the one that is a little different here is what I have as my input number 6, which is my mix input. So let me jump back to Vmix over here. And you can see this is my input number 6. So if I select this into, you see it in my preview over here, if I were to cut, you can see that that's the changes that are taking place here. So how does this get reflected? If I come over into the XML again, what you see here with this is that it is here only saying that this input with this ID is input number 6. It's a mix, and this is what I called it. Its state is pause, which means it's not something that's actively playing something. But again, all of these things are set up. The thing that makes this different is that if you remember down here, I had something called mix 2. And this is what you were seeing. When I made those transitions inside of the mixes, it sort of made that move for me. So I could sit here and go, okay, what's in preview, what's active. And if I change those would be reflected here. You'll note, and I'm not sure why it was done this way. I'm guessing there's some legacy thing. That information is not contained in the XML for the input. So I know, where we go? I know it's a mix because it says this input is a mix, but it doesn't tell me specifically that it's mix 2. So I don't have a comparative there. It doesn't have the key down in the mix entry lower. So they're sort of disconnected, at least right now. So maybe this is something from a scripting point of view that the folks at Vmix can add over time, but having the ability to say, I can tie a specific input that contains a mix to a specific mix and sort of pull that information together. So I know, that when I'm looking, if I know input number 6, this mix is in my program output, I can then turn around and say, I know which mix to make changes to if I wanted to do something in scripting. To me, I may be missing something, so I'm not, there wasn't a clear way to draw that connection. But so this hopefully was helpful. I mean, I wanted to start where all the things that we've been talking about in scripting, at least structurally now, you have a baseline context to interpret that from. So all the things that I've looked at here are basically, what does XML look like, and how does that XML structure that we just covered get realized inside of the Vmix XML. So as I said, this is really the first part. I want to do a second part to this where I show you just how to access these different pieces in scripting code. So it won't be part of a larger project or anything like that. What I want to do is, again, let's set a good baseline for how do we access these different structures inside the Vmix XML using scripting, but do it in a very simple, straightforward. Here's how you read this type of input. Here's how you read overlays. And we'll go through that in part 2 of this. But I really thought this was an important step in making some of the things we've been doing accessible to a broader part of our community here, because that is feedback that we've gotten, and we're very sensitive to that. We want to make sure that what we do is accessible to as many people in the community as possible for each show. All right, so let me see. There's a few other things. It'd be interesting to build a script that could modify XML values in the Vmix preset before it is loaded into Vmix. Perhaps an idea for a future show. Yeah, I mean, that would be a good, I'll put it this way. That would be a good experimental project. You always worry that you could end up breaking something unintentionally, or that there'll be a Vmix update that does something differently, and then suddenly you blow up in the middle of a production. So I'm always reticent to do scripting into things that aren't sort of a published, documented access point. But I think it would be a really fun thing to do as an experiment if I weren't going to be using it live in a production. So thank you, Samuel. So what does an input with multi-view look like? Okay, so by multi-view, Tom, I'm assuming you mean that I have sort of layers in there. So actually, let's do that here. We'll just set something up. So if I come in here, I have this image, so this will be good. So we'll use this as our multi-view example. So inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to layers, and I'll take my NDI input, and I'm going to set this to 50%, and I'll sort of just move that over here, and I'll put a border around it, though I don't think borders show up anywhere. All right. So I have that set up there, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to add a second layer, which will do our, let's see, our video that we have floating around here. And we'll go and we'll edit this, and we'll make this 30%. And I'll put this over here. So we set this up now, so it has multiple layers, so it's set up as a multi-view. So now, with that set, let me go over to the XML. I'll refresh it since we just made some changes here. And this is input number 5. So 3, 4, 5. Okay, so here's how we have this set up now. So when we set this up now, we have basically what this was, which was an image input. That's sort of our base layer, so everything in there. And then what it has is it has the 2 overlays that I put there. So the first one, it says my overlay 0, so it starts 0 indexing. If you remember, that was the, I forget the input number. That was the first input. So if you look here, you can see that I have the input key is 8790. And if I go up and look at the first input, it's 8790. So you can see that sort of right over here. So that is the key for the input we have on layer 1, or layer 0 in this. And this is the key for the input from layer 7, which is sort of right down here somewhere. Yeah, so this is layer 7. So 99967, and that's 99967. So this is set it up here. So you can see it says this is the position, X and Y, that you have it at. This is the zoom factor you've applied to it, X and Y. And this is set up as an overlay with those indices. So that hopefully gives you a sense that all of this stuff, once you understand the broader concept, you can see that it just took the concept of the image input and it added another layer down, because now I edit layers on top of it. And that had all the overlay layers. So that's how that would look, Tom. So hopefully that was helpful. And that would, just to be clear, that would work for, that would work totally for anything that we're doing with, multiple layers, embedded, any of those things. So all 10 layers could work that way. So Vlad's saying now that there's a Zoom integration in Vmix, is there going to be a live to air integration with Vmix anytime soon? So I think, Vmix, I mean, we've talked to the folks at Vmix, about sort of, where we compete and where we don't. And that's something I think we sort of respect, what each is doing. Vmix's value proposition with all of these is that it's all tightly integrated within Vmix, but all of the things work within that Vmix model. So if I'm bringing guests on, I have to be doing that inside of Vmix. Well, potentially I'm starting up other elements of my production and getting other things ready. So it creates a focus point for all of that. What we do from the live to air side is much more of a workflow play, where we give you the ability to sort of onboard users ahead of time, add metadata to them, sort of get them off air talking in a green room, and then you can send that out as a feed with associated metadata and other stuff. Each one has value for different types of productions and complexity of workflow. So we sort of sit in a different space around this. And, we share common technologies, and we both use WebRTC from Vmix Call. And for us, we do it in different ways. We leverage different sort of underlying primitives for it, but we still have, similar overlap. And I think, it's good because we are targeting a different typical workflow than what you would leverage comfortably inside of a Vmix encapsulated remote guest solution, be it Zoom or Vmix Call. Like I said, different use cases, and we're targeting a different segment of the market with that. And, I've talked with Tim and Martin about this, and, they sort of know what we do. And, if Vmix isn't a fit, they recommend us. And, we definitely listen to that on the other side. If we think somebody is overcomplicating things, we tell them, if you have the tool, use what's there. So I think there's a space and a reason for both being in the market. But thank you for asking that. Definitely appreciate it. So let's see, do we have anything else? No? All right, everybody. So why don't we do this? We'll call this main show a wrap, and we will jump into the post show, and we could sort of dive into any of this that you guys want to talk about. Anything new that's coming out in the Vmix world, that you want to share or talk about, happy to do that as well. Hopefully, I will be able to do a show next week. We have a lot of things that are going on at client sites next week. So what I'd like to really do is follow up from this show with with, as I said, a part 2 that sort of talks about how to access these elements in scripting. And if we have a show next week, that's what we'll be doing. But I'll let everybody know. So I just want to sort of give you that ahead of time. So if you can hang around for the post show, that would be great. If you can't, please have a safe and happy week, and I'll see you on the next show. Take care. All right, everybody, welcome back to our post-show hangout. So thank you all for spending the show with us. This is something that there were a fair number of people that were posting either directly to me or to comments on different videos we had done, that it would be helpful to have that sort of level of detail sort of underneath the scripting that we show. And so that's really what I've been targeting this for, as a sort of an on-ramp for people that aren't yet comfortable with XML to sort of move to that next level. So hopefully, that's something that you guys were able to get some benefit out of. And even if, you've done some of the scripting, hopefully there was something in there that was new for you. And as I said, I'm pretty excited about some of the new things in Vmix 27, especially because they've extended the shortcuts pretty significantly. I mean, I've looked at the documentation, and there seem to be a lot of really cool things, especially with positioning layers, zoom, position, crop. All that stuff now is available via shortcuts inside of Vmix. So I'd really love to see how performant that could be. And that would really be something that you could do a lot with in scripting. So I'm pretty excited for that. So Marco was saying, that it's good to understand the logic behind this. And I think that's true. This is sort of that, if you understand how the tools you use are really built and how they work, that can make, first it can make troubleshooting easier. So if something isn't showing up the way you think, you could actually, even if you're not scripting, you could dive into the XML now, look at it and say, oh, I see this is on, or this is, these layers are reversed or whatever. That information is now all there in the XML. So hopefully that's something you'll be able to leverage in multiple ways beyond scripting as well. Are you going to tackle, so this is Vlad saying, are you going to tackle the syntax to get Vmix XML values into scripting? Yes. So that is specifically what I want to do in part 2. So I want to go through the concepts of how do I open an XML source, the Vmix XML source? How do I search within that source to create a list of XML nodes, an XML node list that matches the search? So for instance, I could come back and say, I want to show everything around how to all my inputs. So I want an XML list of each of my inputs. So I could go in there and say, how do you actually set that up and make that work? And then I want to be able to give you things like, if you want to go in a value where that's like the value that's inside of the brackets, as opposed to the outer value, which is sort of with the external brackets. So if I had like inner value that would, so take the example we had where we had entry and then first name, middle initial, last name, that sort of stuff. If I go in and say, I want the full value in an XML node list, I would have something which start out with entry, all of my values, and then /entry to close it. But if the inner value would just show those internal elements, not the entry/entry bracketing. So that will give you that sort of text. And I'll make that clear. So hopefully that's part of what we'll take from what we did today, understanding that and moving that forward. So, all right then. So I figured one last thing that I wanted to sort of show you. And so maybe if I can switch back to my Vmix screen here to give you a look. If you wanted to start playing with this, one of the things you can do is inside of Vmix, you can go in to Data Sources Manager, and this is something that I think could be a lot of fun. I will, let me delete this. I'll start from the very beginning here. So I want to remove this data source. If you wanted to, you could actually start to play with Vmix's own XML structure inside of Vmix. So if I came up here and I said, I want to create a new XML data source. So I'm going to call this XML data source Vmix. And what is the URL for that? Well, we just talked about that. It's localhost/8088/API. So, yeah, I think it's case insensitive. So that, and then you use what's called XPath. And XPath is part of what we'll talk about on next week's show. But if I come in here and go, I know it's Vmix. I know that's sitting there. And so there should be a double slash. That's how we start XPath. And then I'm going to say, and it's inputs. Okay, so this, I want to look at all my Vmix inputs. If I set this up and go OK, I have to put the full. So that's let me jump into the settings again. So it's HTTP. I believe it's just HTTP. I don't believe there's an S in there. And we'll give this a shot. Yeah, there we go. So open this up. So this is giving me now elements that are inside of my Vmix. So if I come here, Vmix inputs. So let's go, we'll change this to something else. We can go and say, let's see, I want to go to Vmix and version. So you can see now that as I do this, you now start to get to play with pulling your own data in from inside of Vmix. And I think that can be really, really useful, because now as you do this, you start to access all of these different constructs that are in here. So if I go, we'll just do one more here as a settings. Let's see, overlays, okay? So if I do that, so now it's just showing you everything that sort of would be sitting in each one of these as overlays. So I don't have a lot of values or other stuff in here, but as you start to play with this will now give you all the constructs you need, and you can start to play with this and look at this in different ways. And, you know, so let me go here and say overlays, and I'll just do overlay. So now we're saying I want all of the things that are overlays. You see, when I go in here now, these are all my overlays that are set up. And if I came in here and said, I want to do the same thing now with inputs, and say, I want all the things that are labeled input, now you'll see that what I get here, these are all my inputs and all the data values that are sitting there. So you can just sort of say, where do you want to walk down the tree? And you can start to pull all this data out. So it could be a lot of fun when you do this. You can end up with, experimenting with seeing what you can find inside of Vmix and what the data values would look like. And inside of this, you could actually create titles or other stuff and use this to put it up there. So if you wanted to put up something where if you were playing a video and it was paused, you could say, okay, I'm going to loop and look for something here where if it's paused, I'll decide to do something and make a change with the data source to display on screen. Oh, we paused the video. So things like that. It could also let you do things like find what's the name of the file of the video that's playing, and you could use that to create a title. So things like that are all sitting here. So interesting stuff that you can do with this. But I just wanted to show you can actually use Vmix to inspect Vmix. So thought it could be fun. All right, so let's see. Do we have... MGL is saying if Vmix is being if the XML is being generated on the fly by Vmix, can I make live changes through an external editor? It's already too late by then. So the way to think of the Vmix XML is it's a mirror that Vmix is holding up to its internal state to let us see it. It's not something that I could make a change to. You use shortcuts to make changes, and you read the Vmix XML to check state, to check the result of those changes. So if I tell something to cut, it will turn around and say, okay, you'll see a different value in preview and active because I did those cuts, and that information will reflect in the XML. But you do that, you don't change the XML to make the cut, you use the shortcut to make the cut, and the XML reflects that change. So that's a good way to think about it. Okay. So for a new project for a Belgium broadcast, this is Multimedia Max. We are combining a custom-made newsroom system, studio automation with Vmix. Very powerful and dynamic. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing with that, Multimedia Max. That definitely sounds really cool. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can do with that. And the other thing is, if you remember, like last season, we did a few shows which leveraged Node.js, which is a more full-featured scripting space than you can get inside of Vmix, because the other is sort of running under Vmix as Vmix is running. This could run on its own on a separate system. The fact that you were actually, that all the Vmix controls are, when you do a script, I can script to a specific box. I can tell Vmix on this IP address to do this, and then I can read the XML state from Vmix on that to check what the results are. I can do that with any external app too. So it's not just under Vmix, but I can do it from something like Node.js or other scripting, Python, other things you may be using. So if you're doing automation, not only can you automate from within Vmix, but you can start to think of this as, I can now have an external automation system that is sending simultaneous commands, some to Vmix, some to live to air, some to some screen projector system that I have, something to a playout system. All of those things now, you can start to use scripting, not just to automate Vmix, but to automate all the systems that are part of a workflow pipeline. So a lot of exciting stuff with that. So streaming stats. As far as I know, no. I haven't really looked into that in any detail. That would be very, very useful to get that. But, it's not something that I see there right now. So, all right. Can you show the data source larger so I can see the parameters? Yeah, it's a little hard. Let me see what I can do with this. Okay, so this is about as good as it can do. So if I came in here and did, click on the right thing, go into settings, this is what I have set up here. So you can sort of see, this is the URL of the Vmix XML. And then all I'm doing here is I'm starting the XML tree. And this is basically called an XPath. We'll talk about that in our next part 2 of this. But it's //vmix /inputs/input. And that's basically saying, walk down the tree, get everything under the root node of Vmix, go to XML, go to my inputs, and then give me all of the things which are input and create a. This is essentially what you get from an XML node list, which is a good way to think of it because we talked about that. So this is something that you have there that you can work with. So hopefully that was a little clearer. But you'll also see in this that certain things are like, I had this video looping, so you can see that its position is changing because I'm saying every second go and refresh the data. And it's doing that, and so you can see these things updating dynamically. So this is the position of the audio, position of the video. So those different things that are running. So hopefully that was a little clearer. But all right then. So Tom, you're quite welcome. So I guess we're going to make this a wrap for today's show. I really appreciate everybody first sticking with us, even though some of these things we didn't do a good job making some of these things clear in the beginning. And have had a lot of shows since then, but also probably more than anything, I appreciate you making the suggestions that we dive in and cover this, because that's something that I always want to be responsive to when there's things that we're sort of have gaps in. So thank you all for that. So hopefully you had a good time. It was great having you here, MGO Video Service. Definitely appreciate it. So. Hopefully everybody found this useful. As I said, if we have a show next week, it'll be great to see you there again. If not, we'll let you know. And in our next show, we'll do the deeper dive into the scripting side of this, the basics for scripting. JP, thank you. Everyone, thank you. Till our next show. Be safe, be well. See you all.